In the hot country where they had been sent to die, the people had a name for it that the agents never learned, and it meant simply the place of the fever. And by the second summer there were more of the people under the red clay than walking on it. Taluu, her name, in the tongue of the Nimiyapu, meant the wild rose, the one that blooms out of bare rock in the canyons and carries the fiercest thorns of anything that flowers. Sat in the door of the government shack in the last thick heat of the day and listened to her son cough, and did the arithmetic she did every evening, and it came out the same as it always came out.
There was the coughing sickness in his chest that the wet, hot air fed like a fire. There was the fever that came up off the bottomland every night on the whine of the mosquitoes. There was the agency doctor who came once a month and shook his head and wrote something in a book and went away.
And there was the plain fact underneath all of it, the fact the whole exile was built on, that they had been brought here 1,000 miles and more from the cold, clean mountains they were made for, to a low, wet, malarial country where a plateau people withered like cut commas in the sun, brought here on purpose, because of people dying quietly in a far place made no trouble, and cost the government nothing but the pretense of feeding them. This was Iyikish Pa, as the people had come to call the whole of it, the hot place, the land of sickness, the Indian Territory, where the survivors of the long flight had been sent after the surrender. Taluu had been a girl of the Wallowa band. She had walked the whole terrible road of the war as a young woman, the fighting retreat of 1,500 miles toward a grandmother's country in the north they never reached. And she had been among those who laid down the rifles at last in the snow of the Bear Paw, 40 miles from freedom, when the old ones and the children could go no further. They had been promised in the surrender that they would be taken home in the spring. They had not been taken home. They had been put on boats and on the iron road and carried down and down into the heat, and the promise had gone the way all the promises went. And now, 2 summers on, Taluu buried the people she had grown up among at the rate of one and then another, and she sat in the door of the shack and listened to her son cough and understood, with the flat clarity that had replaced fear in her a long time ago, that if she did not do something mad, both of her children would be in the red clay before the next green came. She was 28 winters old. She felt older than the river. Her husband was not dead. He was worse than dead. In the particular way this place made its art, he was gone into himself, a strong man of the war years, who had watched his band die of a sickness no arrow could fight, and had stopped speaking and stopped eating rightly, and sat now by the wall staring at a country that was not his country, with eyes that had gone somewhere she could not follow and did not come back from, even when she called his name. The fever had taken his body's strength, and the exile had taken the rest. She grieved him already, sitting beside him. She had married for love, quiet, deep-rooted love, and she watched it drown by inches in the hot, wet air, and there was nothing in her healer's hands that could reach it. Behind her, in the shack that was not a lodge and never would be, her 2 children lay in the killing heat. Tama, the boy, was 10. She had named him for the young red-tailed hawk, and there had been something hawk-like in him once, quick and fierce and watchful, and the fever had eaten it down to enormous eyes and a cough that shook his whole thin frame. Sayaloo, the girl, was 5, named for the swallow that nests in the canyon walls of the homeland, and she had never seen those walls, had been born in the war or just after it, had known nothing her whole small life but the boats and the iron road and the fever country, and still, on the good evenings, she sang a small wordless song to herself that broke her mother clean across, because Taluu did not know how many more evenings there would be. The word came at the dark of that moon, past the way. Water passes through gravel, quick and quiet. A few of the people were slipping away, north and west. Home. It was forbidden. They were prisoners, whatever soft word the government used. To leave was to be a renegade, hunted. And there was talk now of money paid for the return of escaped Nez Perce, dead or living, because a body counted on the rolls was a body the agent could keep drawing rations for and selling the rations off. To run was to risk being shot on the road or dragged back to the fever. To stay was to die slower. Taluu turned it over in the dark, and it was not a hard sum. It only looked hard from the outside. She went to the old man, Husis Ilpilp, redhead, who had been a headman in the free years and had signed nothing and been sent here anyway. And she said the thing plainly. "I am going home with the children. Tama will die in this wet if he stays. His chest will fill up and he will drown standing up. The way this country drowns us all, I would rather he die in the mountains breathing cold, clean air than here in the fever. And if we live, I will get them to the canyon of the great river, to the edge of the old country, and find a way onto the reservation in the north where some of the people are, or into the deep canyon where no agent rides." She paused. "I have heard there is a crossing." A ferry in the deepest part of the canyon of the Snake, kept by a white man who lives alone and is said to be dangerous, and who is also said both these things are said of him, to have never once turned a running Indian over to the soldiers, and to have never lost a single soul on the water. Is it a true thing, or a story people tell so they can bear to hope? The old man's eyes moved in the dark. "I know the crossing you mean, and I know a little of the man, from the war years, and none of it is simple." He was quiet a while. "In the war, when we crossed the great river in flood, Bierto, you were there, you were young, you remember. It was a wonder, the whole band and the horse herd swimming that terrible water and hardly a soul lost, because our people knew the river and honored it. But there were other crossings, smaller ones later, where the army had white men running the boats, and at one of them he stopped. There is a man who ran a ferry for the soldiers at such a crossing in the flood, and a thing happened there with some of our people that he has never been able to put down. That is the man at the canyon crossing now, if it is the same man, and I think it is. He went into the deepest canyon he could find afterward, to a crossing at the bottom of the world, and he has run people over the water ever since, and they say the water has never taken anyone from him, not once, as though he had made a bargain with the river." The old man reached out and found her hand with the terrible strength of the very old. "Whether such a man will help you, I cannot say. A man carrying a thing like that can go either way when it comes back to stand in front of him. But there is death here and a chance there. So go. Go the wrong way up the river, like the salmon, the fish that swims 1,000 miles against the whole weight of the water to come home to the place it was born, and makes life there, and dies in the water that made it. That is the only holy way there is. Go home, daughter. Take the little swallow to the canyon walls she was named for, before this place puts her in the clay." Taluu ran in the black hours in the way of a hunted people, moving in the dark, lying up by day. She could not take her husband. He could not walk the road, and when she knelt before him and told him, lo, that she was taking the children home, he looked at her out of that far place. And for one moment something surfaced in his eyes, something that knew her, and his hand moved and touched the girl's hair. Once, and Taluu understood it for the blessing and the release it was, a drowning man telling her to swim for the children and not for him. She would carry that one touch the whole way. She took a little food and a knife and her grandmother's fire-making and the awl, and she took the children, and she went out past the place in the dark she had watched for weeks, and she did not look back at Kishpa, because there was nothing behind her now but the fever and the red clay and the man she was leaving to it, and the only thing ahead was the wrong way up the river, home, against the whole weight of everything. A man who lives alone at the bottom of the deepest canyon on the continent lives there for a reason, and the reason is never a light one. Everyone who spoke of the ferryman agreed he was dangerous and disagreed about all the rest. They called him Ross, Elam Ross, the ones who knew a name to call him, and the Nez Perce who remembered him gave him a name that meant the one who carries people over the water, and said it without warmth and without hate, the way you name a thing about the river itself. They said he had been an army packer in the war, a mule man, a civilian hired to move the soldiers' freight, and that he had run a ferry for them at a crossing in the flood year. They said something had happened there. They said he had killed men since. They said he did not drink, which in a canyon at the end of the world was its own strangeness. They said he took anyone across who came to the water, settler, miner, Chinese, placer hand, Indian, hunted or free, and asked no questions and kept no side, and that the one thing that would make the silent man speak sharp was any talk of a soul being risked on the river, that he ran the safest crossing on the whole Snake and was fierce about it past all reason, as though every person he set down safe on the far bank paid down some debt only he could see. Most of it was closer to true than the men who said it knew. The journey nearly finished what the fever had begun. It was the better part of 2 moons. The plains, the breaks, the mountains rising at last blue and cold and holy on the edge of the world, the old country. She moved by night and the stars. She foraged, she doctored the boy's chest with what plants she could find. She stole nothing and begged nothing, and once, hidden in a coulee, watched a party of horsemen ride the road she had just left, and knew them for what they were, men who rode for the bounty, reading the ground for exactly her. The boy worsened in the high cold at first, and then, as they climbed out of the low wet world into the clean air of the mountains, began against everything to mend, his cough loosening, some hawk-light coming back into his eyes, and Taluu wept the first night she heard him breathe, easy, silently, so as not to wake him, because it meant the old man had been right. It meant home itself was a medicine, and she had been carrying her children the only way there was. But the last of it was the river, and the river nearly took them all. They came down at last off the high country into the canyon of the Snake in the first hard week of an early winter, and the canyon was a thing that stopped even her who had grown up in canyons, a gash in the world, a mile and more deep. The river, a green-white rope of fury at the bottom of it, the far wall going up and up into snow and cloud. The old country lay across that water, and the water was in flood and freeze, the worst combination the river knew, high with an early storm's melt and running ice, cold enough to stop a strong swimmer's heart in the time it takes to gasp. She should have waited. She knew it even as she did it. But there was smoke on the far side, a wisp of it low by the water that might be the crossing, might be shelter, might be the ferry the old man had spoken of. And there were riders behind her. She had cut their sign that morning, closing, and the boy was shivering in a way she did not like as the true cold came down. And she made the mother's calculation, the one that is not really a calculation at all, and she found the place where the river spread and slowed over a gravel bar and looked in the failing light as though it might be forded, and it was not, and she took her children into the water. They were halfway when the bar dropped away under them into a channel the low light had hidden, and the river took them. It took the girl first. Taluu went out of Taluu's frozen grip on a surge of green water and ice. A small, dark shape swept downstream, not even crying out, gone under, and Taluu screamed her name into the roar and lunged after her and was herself taken, rolled under, the cold slamming into her like a fist made of the whole mountain, the boy's hand torn from her other hand. She had lost them both. She had brought them 1,000 miles the wrong way up the river to drown them at the very door of home, And the last clear thought she had as the green closed over her was not for herself at all, but a single word, her daughter's name flung up out of her into the killing water. And then there was a boat. She never afterward could say how it was there so fast. A heavy flat-bottomed ferry scow, and a man at the sweep of it, working the current the way another man breathes, and he had, she pieced it together only later, seen them from the far bank in the last light, seen a woman take children into that water at that hour, and had known instantly what she did not, and had loosed the scow into the flood, not to cross but to be below them, downstream, where the river would bring them to him, because a man who has spent years learning one stretch of terrible water knows where the water carries what it takes. He had the girl first, reached down into the green, and had her by the deer skin of her dress, and swung her up and into the boat like a landed fish, and she coughed and lived. And then the boy, farther out, and the man went nearly in after him, half over the sweep, one huge arm hooking the boy's thin body as the current tried to fold the scow. And Taluu he came to last because she was the strongest and the river was slowest to win her. And he got a fist in her hair and hauled her over the whale and dumped her in the bottom of the boat with her children. And then there was nothing in the world but the man fighting the sweep, silent, enormous, reading the flood, walking the wild scow across the whole width of that fury by a craft so complete it looked from the boat bottom like a kind of prayer until the bow ground at last onto gravel on the far side. The home side, the old country, and he stood over them breathing hard, streaming water, and none of them dead. She got up. She would never be able to say how. She got the children up, both breathing, both coughing river out of their small lungs, both alive, and she stood swaying on the shore of her homeland with her hand on each of them, and she looked at the man, and he looked back with a face that gave away nothing at all except a thing far back in the eyes that she would come to know was the particular terror of a man who has just been made one more time to reach into the water for someone. You crossed
the fever country with these two and came the wrong way up half the west, he said at last. His voice was rough with disuse. It was not a question, and it was not praise. It was a man revising against his will an estimate. And then you tried to ford the Snake in a December flood. There was smoke, she said when she could speak, and there were men behind me who ride for the bounty. There was no waiting. Something moved in his face and was gone. He looked at the boy, coughing, alive, at the girl, coughing, alive. And something in his shoulders came down by a fraction, some weight set down.
"I am not begging," Taluu said then, though she said it standing half-drowned in front of the man who had just pulled her children from the river, because it was the one thing she had left that was hers. "I have work in my hands. I can tan. I can sew. I can doctor with the plants. I can cook. I can find food in country that looks empty. I am asking for the winter, until the passes let me get to the people in the north, on the reservation, where I can be lost among my own. I earn every mouthful. I will not be a debt to any man." The man was quiet a long time. The river roared its eternal roar. At last he said roughly, as though the words were stones he had to lift, "You don't owe me for the water. Nobody owes for being pulled out of the river. That's not what it is." He turned and made the scow fast against the current with the automatic care of long habit. "But there's a cabin and a winter coming that'll close this canyon like a fist, and hands are welcome, and I'll not pretend otherwise." He did not look at her. "And nobody who comes to this crossing gets given to the soldiers or the bounty men, not off my ferry. That's the one thing this ferry is for. Whatever you've heard about me getting here, which you'll have heard plenty, most of it's true. Come out of the cold anyway." That was the first night, and none of them slept but the children, who slept the drugged, deep sleep of the saved and the warm, coughing river out of their lungs in the night, while their mother started up at every sound. She kept her knife near, not because she had decided to fear the man, but because trust was a thing she no longer gave on the strength of a single mercy. Near dawn, she heard him go down in the dark to the water, and she rose and looked, and saw him standing at the edge of the river in the starlight, not doing anything, only standing at the water the way a man stands at a grave, and after a long while he came back up, and she understood that whatever this man was, the danger in him was not turned toward her, and never would be. It was turned every hour of his life on himself and on the river, which he seemed to be forever asking a question it would not answer. They did not become anything all at once. Those who tell such stories afterward like to say a hard winter melts strangers together, that need makes love. But it is slower and stranger than that, and it is made of 10,000 small wordless things, and it can go either way for a long time before it sets. She learned him the way you learn a river. She learned that he rose before light and went down to the water first thing, always, and looked at it, read its height, its color, its ice, the way another man reads a sky, and that, with the boat, he was another man entirely, sure and easy and complete, a man who had found the one place in the world where he knew exactly what he was for. She learned that he could go a whole day and speak 9 words. She learned that he ate what she cooked, and said nothing but ate all of it, and that once she caught him at the door with his eyes shut and his face turned to the smell of the pot, looking like a man remembering a house he had lived in once long ago, and she learned the shape of his wound, though it was deep in the winter before he spoke of it. The girl thawed fastest, the way the small ones do. Seilu was 5, and the near drowning had marked her. For a while she would not go near the water, would scream if she woke and heard it too loud, and it was the man, wordlessly, who cured it. He did not force her toward the river. He did the opposite. He began, when she was near, to name the water for her. Low in the trade tongue and in the few words of her own language he had, "This eddy is safe. This one pulls. Here the fish rest. Here the river sleeps in summer," teaching a 5-year-old the river the way he had learned it, so that the thing that had nearly killed her became, mouthful by mouthful of knowledge, a thing she understood, and a thing understood is a thing half tamed. Within a moon she would sit beside him on the bank while he mended the scow and tell him gravely which eddy pulled, and he would nod as though she had told him something he did not know, and Taluu, watching, had to look away. The boy took longer, the way the boy always does. Tama had made himself the man of his family too young, had watched his father go away into that far silent place, had decided somewhere on the long road that it fell to him now. And he was ashamed, with a 10-year-old's fierce shame, that he had been pulled from the river like a child, that a stranger had saved what he should have been able to save. He watched Ross with a hungry, jealous, aching wariness, wanting to be taught the thing the man knew, furious at the wanting. He worked himself past exhaustion and would not admit tiredness. It was Ross who broke it, in his own slow way. One gray morning he did not push the boat off alone. He put the spare sweep in the boy's hands and said in the trade tongue, "A man who lives on a river should be able to read it. It's the hardest thing there is to learn, and the most useful, and there's no faking it. The river knows in a second if you're lying to it. You mind me exact, and I'll teach you the water." And he taught him how to read the tongue of a current, where the drowned rocks were, by the boils on the surface, how to ferry across a flow by angling the boat and letting the river's own strength carry you where you meant to go instead of fighting it head-on. "You don't beat a river," he told the boy, "ever. Man who tries to beat it drowns. You read it, and you use what it's already doing, and you go where you're going by working with the thing that's trying to kill you. That's the whole secret of the river and of most things." And the day the boy ferried the light skiff across a hard eddy alone and landed it exactly where he'd aimed, Ross said nothing and praised nothing. He only nodded once, and the boy carried that single nod around inside him for a week like a coal that would not cool. Winter closed the canyon like a fist, as he'd said it would. Snow choked the rims a mile up. The trails out froze shut. The river ran black and smoking with cold between shelves of shore ice. They were sealed into the bottom of the world together, the four of them, and there was a mercy in it. The bounty men could no more get in than she could get out, and there was the long, forced intimacy of it, which strips people down past their manners to the plain grain of what they are. She learned that he was fair, which surprised her. He shared the food even, gave the children the better of it. He never raised his voice. Not to her, not to the children, not to the old dog that kept the cabin, not even at the river. And she came to understand that the danger the canyon whispered about him was real, but that it pointed always inward, that he was a man holding something at bay with the whole of his strength, and that their coming had shifted the balance of his long private war with the water, had given him, for the first time in years, someone to carry over instead of only someone to have failed. One deep night the girl woke screaming, not the river this time, but a dream of the fever country, of the red clay, of her father's face going far away, and could not be reached, thrashing in a terror too big for her small body. Taluu held her and could not quiet her. And then the big man was there in the dark, awkward, enormous, kneeling by them. And he did the only thing he knew. He began, low and rough and badly, to sing. It was a riverman's song, a boatman's song from some other country of his life, the words worn smooth, and it meant nothing to the child at all. And it did not matter, because the meaning was in the low, steady grain of a big, safe voice in the dark, the voice of a man who had proven he would come into the water after you, and the child quieted against it and slept. And Ross stayed there a while on his knees on the cold floor, and Taluu saw that his face was wet, and she looked away to give
him the privacy of it. And neither of them ever spoke of that night. But in the morning he brought up from some store a little twist of real sugar he'd been keeping, and gave it to the children, which was the only way he had of saying the thing he could not say. And she took it, the only way she had, by cooking him the best of what there was, and setting it down without a word. It was the heart of the winter when he finally told her.
They had fallen into the way of sitting up after the children slept, sharing the fire and the sound of the river, and one night he looked into the coals a long time, and then he began roughly, and she let him, and did not look at him because she understood he could only say it to the fire. He told her about the war, not the fighting. He'd been a civilian, a packer, mules, and freight for the column that chased her people across half a continent. And he told her flat, without mercy for himself, about the crossing. The army had commandeered a ferry at a river swollen with flood and put him on it, because he was the best boatman they had, and there had come a day when a party of Nez Perce, not warriors, women, old ones, children, a piece of a band cut off and trying to cross to catch up with the rest, had come to that river from the wrong side, trying to get across and away. And the officer had ordered the ferry held on the army's bank, had ordered Ross not to take the boat over. And Ross, young, hired, afraid of the officer, telling himself it was not his to decide, telling himself the water was too high to risk the boat, telling himself all the things a man tells himself, had obeyed. He had stood at the sweep of a boat that could have crossed, and he had held it on the near bank on another man's word, and he had watched a mother take her children into that flood because the boat would not come, the way Taluu herself had taken hers, and he had watched the river take them, watched it take a woman and 2 children and an old man not 30 feet from a boat he could have loosed, and he had not loosed it. And by the time the officer's back was turned, and Ross went in on his own, it was too late for all but one, an old woman he'd dragged out half dead. "I could have taken the boat over," he said. "The water was no worse than a dozen crossings I've made since, right here. I've told myself for years it was too high. It wasn't too high. I was afraid of a man in a blue coat, and it cost 4 people the river, and one of 'em was a woman with 2 children going into the water because the boat wouldn't come for her." He raised his eyes to hers at last. "And the well had a bottom, and there was something living down there in the dark of it. And then you come up out of the fever country the wrong way, up the whole river,
A woman with 2 children, and you go into the water at my crossing because you couldn't wait for a boat. And this time the boat came. This time I loosed it. That's why I'm in this canyon.
I run the deepest, worst crossing there is, and I've never lost a soul on it, not one, because every single time I go in after somebody, I'm going in after them, the ones at that first crossing, and I never get there. They're always still drowned. It's always still too late. Except this time." His voice was not steady. "This time the boat came in time. You understand what you did, walking into my river? You gave me the one thing I never thought I'd get. You let me not be too late one time before I die." Taluu was quiet a long while. The fire settled. The river spoke its endless sentence. She thought of the easy things people say and set them all aside. At last she said, "Redhead told me, before I ran, that a man carrying a thing like yours can go either way when it comes back to stand in front of him. You held a boat on a bank once out of fear, and 4 people went into the water. That is true, and it is yours, and you will carry it into the ground. And you went into a December flood for 3 strangers, who are the very ones you failed, and this time you were not too late. That is also true, and also yours. You do not get to keep only the first one, because it is heavier, and lets you go on hiding at the bottom of the world, hating yourself, which is easier than the work of forgiving yourself out where people can see you do it." She looked at him. "The river takes what it takes. You told my son, you do not beat a river, you read it and use what it's already doing. You have been trying for years to beat this one, to make it give back what it took. You cannot, but you can do what you did the night I came. You can be the boat that comes in time. For the next one, and the next. That is not beating the river. That is going home across it, the only way there is." He did not answer, but something in him that had been clenched for years eased, and after a while he banked the fire careful and lay down and slept, she thought, better than he had, and in the morning he took the boy down to the water with something new in him, some spark that had only been endured before and now faintly mattered. They were not a family, but a fire has to be small before it can be large, and this one had caught. Trouble in that country did not announce itself. When the passes opened enough in a February thaw for a man to get down into the canyon, it came riding to the water on a good horse, smiling. His name was Merrick, and he wanted the crossing. He had come into the canyon country with the mining money and the ambition that always followed the gold, and he had grasped the one thing that mattered at the bottom of a mile-deep gorge, that whoever owned the crossing owned the canyon. Every ounce of placer gold, every pound of freight, every miner and settler and supply had to cross the Snake somewhere, and there was one good crossing in 40 miles of fury, and it was Ross's, and Ross was a lone man with no partners, and, Merrick assumed, no paper. Merrick meant to have it, to run his own scow, set his own toll, and choke the canyon's whole trade through his own fist. And a lone ferryman who wouldn't sell was a problem a man like Merrick knew several ways to solve. He rowed up to the landing, and Ross went down to meet him, and did not offer to take him across, and that, too, was a language. Merrick talked pleasantly at length. About the thaw, hard to time, wasn't it? About how the country was opening, how a man had to think about the future, how it grieved him to see a good crossing run by one aging man with one old boat when the whole canyon's prosperity depended on it. About how the ferry had surely never been properly chartered, no territorial license, no paper in order, just a squatter with a scow when you came down to it, and how it would be a simple, neighborly thing to come to an arrangement, a fair price, more money than a ferryman would see in 10 years of tolls. And then, still smiling, He looked past Ross up the bank to where Taluu stood in the cabin door with the children behind her, and his pleasant face did something small and satisfied. "Now that's a surprise," Merrick said. "Didn't take you for a family man, Ross. Those are Nez Perce, or I'm a Chinaman, and there aren't supposed to be any Nez Perce in this country anymore. They're all down in the territory, aren't they? Every last one, by government order, which makes those 3 runaways. And there's money on runaways brought in. The agency pays, and pays better, for quiet." He let it sit, gentle as falling snow. "So here's the whole of it, friend. You sell me the crossing at a fair price and go your way, and I never saw a Nez Perce woman and 2 children at the bottom of this canyon. Or you don't, and I mention it to the right men, and they come down here with the next thaw and settle the ferry question and the runaway question both in an afternoon, and nobody in this territory loses a night's sleep over 1 drowned squatter and 3 renegades who tried to swim the Snake. That's not a threat. I don't threaten. That's just the arithmetic of the country." He gathered his reins, pleasant as Sunday. "You think on it. I'm patient. But the thaw's coming, and so's the trade, and patience runs out with the ice." He touched his hat to Taluu, the courtesy the deliberate insult, and turned his horse and rode back up the canyon trail, unhurried, certain, the way men ride when they believe the season and the law are both on their side. That night the cabin was very quiet. The children slept. Taluu sat across the fire from Ross and said the thing that had sat in her chest since noon like a stone. "When the pass is open, we will go," she said, "north to the reservation, to be lost among the people. It is early and the mountains are not safe, but this is worse." "He will bring the bounty men, and they will come for the crossing and find us, and you will die at your own water for 3 people who are not—" She stopped. "Who are not yours. You pulled us from the river. You gave us the winter. There is no debt. I will not have your death at the same water that already carries the 4 you could not save." For a long time Ross did not answer. The river spoke in the dark. Then he told her the last of it, the thing under all the other things. "That old woman I pulled out at the first crossing," he said. "The one I got to in time. The only one. She lived. Cursed me first, in your tongue, which I didn't have then and have since learned enough of to know what she said. And then years later she found me. Here, came down into this canyon, an old woman. To the crossing she'd heard a white ferryman kept who never lost a soul, and she knew me, and I knew her. And I thought she'd come to curse me again, and I'd have taken it. I'd have knelt for it." He was quiet. "She didn't. She looked at me a long time, and she said, 'I'll say it the way she said it. You have spent your life at the water paying me. Stop paying me. Pay the next one instead.' And then she let me carry her across for nothing, and she blessed the boat. And she went up the far trail to die in her own country. And I've not understood what she meant until this winter, until you—" He raised his eyes. "Pay the next one instead. You're the next one. You and that boy and that little girl who's learning my river. You're not the debt. You're where the debt gets paid. And you think I'm going to hand you to Merrick's bounty men to keep my own hide and my own boat? I've run out of years worth saving myself for. I'd sooner spend the ones I've got left being the boat that comes in time than go back to being the man who held it on the bank. I'm not moving, and neither are you. We'll meet whatever comes to this water together." He did not say stay, or you are mine, though Merrick had said the last for him, and he had not corrected it. He said that instead, which was more, and Taluu understood that they had crossed some river in the dark without either of them naming the water. The waiting that followed was its own hardship, worse than a blow because it only sat and grew. But Ross did with it what he had done with everything. He turned it into teaching. He showed the boy the ways a person on foot could climb the canyon that a mounted man could not follow. up the goat trails to a hidden bench in the rim rock where one person with a rifle could hold a path against many, and he provisioned it quiet. A robe, dried salmon, a skin of water in the days after Merrick came. He taught the little girl gently, made a game of being small and still and silent as a stone in the shore willows, so the game would be in her hands if ever the terror came. He was doing for these children, Taluu understood, watching him, exactly what no one had done for the family at that first flooded crossing. He was giving them a way to not be taken by the water or the men, a plan, a place, a chance. And she knew it was a prayer he was making with his hands, offered up late to 4 people the river had. And she did not tell him she saw it, because some things a man must be let do without being watched. They did not wait to be surprised. That was Taluu's doing, and it was the moment she stopped being a stranger, sheltering at the man's crossing, and became the other half of the thing they were building. "You are thinking like a man who defends a ferry," she told him. "How to hold the trail when they come, how to win the fight at the water. But you taught my son the truth of it yourself. You do not beat the thing that is stronger than you. You read it, and you use what it is already doing. Merrick's whole strength is that no one sees him, that he can take the crossing in the dark at the bottom of the world, and no one who matters will ever know or care. His strength is the darkness the canyon gives him, so we do not fight his darkness with a rifle. We use what the river of this whole country is already doing. We let in the light." And she laid it out, the plan she had turned in the long nights, and she watched something come into Ross's face she had not seen there before. Not surprise, but recognition. The look of a man realizing the woman at his fire had a mind on her like a honed blade, and reading a current he had not thought to read. Merrick believed the crossing had no paper, but Ross, it turned out, was not the squatter Merrick took him for. Years back, in a rare season of hope, he had done the one lawful thing. He had gone up out of the canyon to the territorial seat and filed for a ferry charter. A license to keep the crossing, granted by the territory, recorded, stamped, a real thing with a real seal, filed and then half forgotten by a man who had gone back down to the bottom of the world to drown in his own guilt. He had it still in a tin, oiled against the damp. The crossing was chartered in Elam Ross's name, lawful, on record, in 2 places. Merrick could kill him for it, but he could not simply take it, not cleanly. A burned-out squatter is nothing, but a murdered lawful charter holder whose paper sits in a territorial ledger is a thread that can be pulled. And there was more, and this was the current Taluu had seen that Ross had not. The Nez Perce in exile were not friendless. Far away, a movement was rising. Presbyterian missionaries who had known the people for a generation, and certain army officers who had fought them and come, in the strange way of honest soldiers, to respect and then to champion them, were writing letters, filling newspapers, pressing Washington to let the survivors of Yaakishpa come home before the fever finished them all. It was a slow, late, imperfect turning, and it would not save everyone, and it came years too late for so many. But it was real, and it was gathering, and it meant that a Nez Perce woman and 2 children were no longer only renegades on an agency ledger. They were, if the light were let in, exactly the kind of story the missionaries and the officers were desperate to put in front of the country. Proof faces, a witness, a mother who had carried her children 1,000 miles the wrong way up the river to keep them out of the clay. So Ross went, not toward Merrick, but up and out, 4 hard days through the thaw-treacherous passes to the mission station on the reservation in the north. And he did the thing Merrick could never have imagined a canyon ferryman doing, because it meant walking back into the human world he had exiled himself from. He carried the charter, and he carried Taluu's story. And he laid both before the missionary, a formidable woman who had spent her life among the Nez Perce and whose letters reached editors and congressmen, and before a sympathetic officer at the fort who had been with the column in the war and had never made his peace with what was done to the people afterward. And the story went out, a copy of the charter lodged where it could not vanish, letters written, the newspaper editor promised, the officer's word given that the woman and children at the canyon crossing were under his eye now, and that any bounty men who turned up dragging Nez Perce children out of Hell's Canyon would find themselves the subject of a report that reached above the agency and into the hands of the very men now being shamed in print into bringing the exiles home. It was not a gunfight, and that was the whole of the point, and it was the thing Merrick could not feel because he was a man of the closing frontier and could not sense the ground shifting under him. The day was ending when a rich man could take what he wanted at the bottom of a canyon with bounty men and a smile, and the day was coming, slowly, unevenly, too late for so many, when a thing written down and witnessed could matter more than a gun. It was a corrupt age, and the paper more often served the Merricks than their victims, but not always, and a woman who had come the wrong way up the whole river, Taluu had learned, must become very good at finding the not always. Merrick came, in the end, as she had known he would. But not one rider in the afternoon. He came with 3 hard bounty men in the gray before dawn. On the first morning the trail was passable, thinking to do it under color of the agency's writ and find them asleep. But the old dog was awake and the boy was awake, Tama, proud on the middle watch. And by the time they reached the landing, Ross stood at the mouth of the cabin with a rifle, and Taluu was up in the rimrock with another, where she could not be rushed, and could see the whole landing laid out below her, and the bounty men, who were killers, but not fools, could see in the growing light that this would not be the easy dawn work they'd been promised. The lead bounty man had the agency paper and read it, an order for the return of renegade Nez Perce. Ross let him finish, then he spoke, and his voice carried flat and cold off the canyon walls and over the roar of the water.
You can take that paper back to Merrick, and you can tell him some things. Tell him this crossing's chartered, territorial license, filed, stamped, recorded at the seat, a copy in my hand and a copy in the ledger. He wants it. He can't take it off a dead squatter because I'm not one. He'd be killing a lawful charter holder, and that's a thread with a seal on the end of it. He let it sit. Then tell him the harder thing.
There's a missionary in the north with letters in half the newspapers back east about bringing the Nez Perce home, and there's an army officer at the fort who fought these people and is ashamed of what came after, and they both know now about a woman and 2 children at this crossing, names written down. In 3 places you can't reach. You drag these 3 out of this canyon this morning. You don't stop any of that. It's already gone upriver, past you. All you do is put your own names in a report that lands on the desk of the exact men who are right now being shamed in print into letting these people go home. The country's turning, boys. You just can't feel it yet at the bottom of a hole in the ground. There's a day damn near here when a man like Merrick is more afraid of ink than lead, and you're the fools he sent down a mile of canyon to stand in front of it, holding the guns when it breaks. It was a strange kind of confrontation, and the strangeness was the whole of it. Merrick's men had come prepared for a fight they could win or a bluff they could break. They were not prepared to be told the battle had already been fought and lost days ago and 100 miles away in ink and charters and a missionary's letters where their guns could not reach. And bounty men are killers for money, and money will not spend a man's own life against a fortified rifle above and a rifle below, and the promise that the killing buys him nothing but a place at the top of a report an ashamed officer is waiting to write. One by one, Taluu watched them do the sum such men do faster than any other, the sum of leverage, and watched it come out, for each of them wrong. The lead man folded the agency paper and put it inside his coat. "Merrick never said nothing about no charter and no newspapers," he said to the others more than to Ross. "This ain't the job he hired. Let him come dig his own hole." And he turned his horse. There was no Merrick to face down that dawn. He had sent men to do it, the way such men always do. But the men rode back up the canyon trail unhurried, trying to keep it looking like a choice, and there was nothing certain left in the way they rode. And when the word went back up out of the canyon, the charter, the missionary, the officer, the ink, Merrick, who was a coward under the pleasantness as such men always are, and who understood leverage better than anyone, and had just felt it reverse under him, found urgent business in another part of the territory, and did not come down to the crossing again. No shot had been fired. That was the victory, and it was Taluu's as much as Ross's. And when the riders were gone, she came down out of the rimrock and stood beside him on the landing, their shoulders nearly touching, the great river roaring past at their feet, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all, because the not losing was so large and so good that words would only have made it smaller. A spring came to the canyon the way it comes to that country, not gently, but all at once, in a green roar. The snow drew back up the walls. The side creeks came down white and loud, and then, in the good time, the river changed its voice, and the salmon came. They came the way they had come since before the people, since before anything. Up out of the far ocean, up the whole length of the great river and its great tributary 1,000 miles and more against the whole weight of the water, leaping the white rapids, battered and silver and unstoppable, driven by the one thing stronger than the current, which is the need to come home to the exact water that made them, and make life there and die in it. And Taluu stood on the landing with her children and watched the first of them come up through the green water at the bottom of the world, and she wept openly this time, because the old man had told her to go home the wrong way up the river like the salmon. And she had, and here they were, all three of them alive at the salmon's own homecoming, and it was the truest thing she had ever seen. She had said in the winter only until the passes open. The passes opened, and no one spoke of going. Instead, they stayed and they built. Ross ran the crossing, and the trade came with the thaw as Merrick had known it would. Only now the tolls came into Ross's own tin and not Merrick's fist, and there was money for the first time in the cabin, and Taluu spent it on seed and cloth and salt. She broke a garden in the rich bench soil above the flood line and put in what would grow, and she taught the little girl the old songs that thanked the seed and thanked the salmon, and Siilu, the swallow, come home at last to the canyon walls she was named for, sang them in her high clear voice, and Ross, mending the scow, listened without letting on. They built up the cabin. Ross and the boy cut and hauled and raised a second room, and the raising of it was Tama's true coming of age more than any sweep or nod. The day he set a beam with his own strength, and Ross said, in front of his mother, "He reads the water better than most grown men I've hired, and he's a better hand besides." And the boy had to turn and study the far canyon wall very hard so no one would see his face. And the man changed most of all. Not suddenly, not completely. He would always be a man with a deep, dark current in him, who went down alone to stand at the water in the starlight and ask it the old question. But the ghost went out of him by degrees over that green season. He spoke more. He laughed once or twice, a rusty, astonished sound, as though he'd found a tool he thought long lost. And he began to do a thing that told Taluu more than any words, when the Nez Perce began, that year and the next, to come home from the exile, for the turning did come, and the survivors of Iakishpa were let go at last, broken and grieving, and far fewer than had gone down, some to the northern reservation. A certain number of them found that the deepest, worst crossing on the Snake was kept by a white ferryman who would carry any of the people over the water for nothing, who asked no toll of a Nez Perce going home, who had learned enough of the language to say, "Welcome home, and the water is safe today, and your country is across this river." He could not undo the first crossing. He knew it. He never once pretended otherwise. But he had stopped trying to beat that river. He had become instead the boat that comes in time, over and over for every one of the people the current tried to keep from home. And that was not paying a debt to the dead. It was paying it forward to the living, which the old woman had told him, at this very water, was the only way there was. There was word, that year carried up the river with the returning people, that Taluu carried into herself and held. Her husband had not lived to be let go. The fever had taken him in the second spring of the exile, gone quietly into the far place he had already half departed for, and was buried in the red clay of Iakishpa, 1,000 miles the wrong way down the river from home. She grieved him the way the river grieves, which is to keep moving. She built him into the story she told the children by the fire, so that the swallow and the young hawk would carry their true father home in the only way left, in the telling. And Ross, when she told him, did not offer comfort, because he was not a man who dealt in it. He only said, after a long silence, "Then he's one more the water kept from getting home, so we get his children the rest of the way. That's the least a man can do, see the children home when the father couldn't." And she understood it for the vow it was. It happened in the end over something small. That is how the largest things always happen. It was late in the green season, the light gone long and gold down in the canyon in the evenings, the garden heavy on the bench, the salmon thick in the river. Siwalu had gone too near the water's edge after a leaping fish, and slipped on the wet stone and gone in, only to her waist, in a safe, slow eddy she herself had named, and in no true danger. But she had cried out, and Ross had been there before her mother could move, one long stride and his great arm scooping her up out of the water and setting her on the bank. And the child, wet and frightened and safe, had wrapped her arms around his neck and called him, oh, without thinking, the way children say the truest things, by a word that meant father. The canyon went very still under the roar of the river. Ross did not say anything. He did not correct her. He only stood there with the small wet girl against his chest, and his hand, that great scarred hand that had held a boat on a bank once out of fear, and had gone into a December flood since for these three, came up very slowly and rested on the child's dark wet head as though it were the most fragile thing the world had ever made. And Taluu, coming up with her heart still in her throat, found him looking at her over the child's head, and everything neither of them had said across a whole winter and spring of silences was in that one look, and it did not need saying, and so it was not said. Later, when the children slept, they sat on the landing, in the warm dark, with the whole enormous ribbon of canyon sky wheeling overhead, and the river running its endless sentence at their feet, and for a while neither spoke.
"She didn't mean anything by it," Taluu said at last, offering him the way out, because offering people the way out was a habit of hers.
"Children say, I know what children say." A pause. The water spoke. "And I know what I'd want them to be able to say. Their father—" He stopped and found the words one at a time in the dark, like reading a current he'd never run. "He's one of the ones the river kept from home. He's theirs, and he always will be, and he'll be in the stories, and I'll help you tell them, so those two carry him the rest of the way." He was quiet. "I'm not asking to take anything of his. I know to the bone what it is to fail somebody at the water and never set it down. I'm only saying there's room, here, at this crossing, for him in the telling, and for me in the days, and for—" The last word came hardest of anything she had ever heard him say. "Us, if you want it. And if you don't, that's a whole thing too, and you'll have this place in safe passage as long as the river runs, you and them, and I'll not say another word." It was, she thought, the longest string of words she had ever heard him put together, and every one had cost him, and that was how she knew. She did not answer with a word. She reached across the small dark distance and put her hand over his, over that great scarred hand, and she felt it turn under hers and close around it, careful, as though her hand were a thing that could break, as though it were the most precious thing he had held in a very long time. They were not even then a perfect happiness, and she made herself be honest about that in the dark. There would be hard years still, floods and lean winters, and the long shadow of the agency and the settlers and the whole narrowing world reaching even into the bottom of the canyon. The old, free life of the Wallowa was gone off the earth. No love and no crossing could give back the homeland the settlers held now, or the free bands, or her husband in the red clay, or the more than 100 of the people the fever country had taken, or the 4 the river took at that first crossing long ago. Grief does not end. It only makes room, if you let it, for other things to grow up alongside it, the way the wild rose she was named for grows its fierce blooms straight out of the bare canyon rock, where nothing has any business living at all. But they had made a family out of strangers, out of a flooded crossing, and a boatman's song sung badly in the dark, and a river that, once, let a boat come in time. And a family, she had come to understand, was not only the thing you were born into and could lose. It was also the thing you chose over and over against the whole weight of the current, to keep alive, the choice you made each morning, like a salmon choosing the wrong way up the water because the wrong way is the only way home. It was a fire you tended, a boat you kept sound precisely because you knew, better than anyone, how deep the water was and how easily it took what it wanted, and how rare and how holy it was when the boat came in time. The stars turned overhead in their narrow, bright ribbon between the canyon walls, the same stars that had looked down so indifferently on her in the fever country a lifetime ago when she knelt beside a husband gone far away,
and swore she would take the children home. They did not seem indifferent now. Or perhaps they were exactly as indifferent as they had always been, and the only thing that had changed was her. A woman sitting by the great river, with her hand in a good man's hard hand, her children safe and home and sleeping. The salmon running silver in the dark water below her, having come, all of them, the whole impossible wrong way up the river and arrived. Either way, she thought, it was enough. It was more than enough.
Against all the cold arithmetic of that country and that age, it was a life earned, imperfect, bought too dear, and quietly, stubbornly going on. Somewhere up on the black rim a coyote called, and another answered, and the old dog lifted its head at the water's edge and listened, and finding all well, lay back down, and it was well. For now, in the small fire-lit place they had made at the bottom of the deep canyon, against the enormous dark and the enormous water, it was well.